Hey everyone, James from TeaDB here, bringing you another in-between episode. So hope everyone is doing well, staying safe, and hanging out and not getting too bored, and drinking lots of tea. So I am again at my new location here. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about comparisons and how we can do sort of these side-by-side comparisons, what they're good for, maybe some of the limitations as well, and then doing a side-by-side with a couple Xiaguan Feitai cakes. First, a little bit about comparisons. If you've never done one before, I think the best way to do it is to basically get identical brewing devices. You know, when you brew something in a Xiaguan versus a pot, it's just going to be a little different. So if you do have similar devices or the same, in the case of these, I got these from the same place. They're small 70 milliliter Xiaguans. So ideally, small size is also pretty good because you just don't want to consume too much of the tea. You're also just going to appreciate the tea a little bit more differently doing this way. I do recommend you go at least to the 60 milliliter range. Smaller than that, I think, is a little too small, in my opinion. Having if you had a pot and a Xiaguan and you're brewing those side by side, it's not ideal, but it will work. So don't let that be a limiting factor. But pick up a couple cheap Xiaguans. I use these Xiaguans mainly just for TeaDB episodes and for these side-by-side comparisons. They're not what I would use normally. I usually prefer to drink either of these teas from a Yixing teapot. Yeah, so that's kind of just the basic methodology. I also like to keep brew counts of it, so I will do steep 2 and then steep 2 of this. And that's just to sort of keep it even, because sometimes steep 2 versus steep 6 of a different tea, they're just going to be a little different. So I try to keep the brew counts at least within 1 or 2 away from each other. A couple other things is contrasts. When you're comparing side-by-sides, it's just really going to emphasize the differences between the tea. For me, I don't recommend just doing side-by-side comparisons. I think they're good, but you also can learn different things by just doing simple solo sessions. For me personally, when I just want to enjoy a tea, I'd rather do a solo session of a tea rather than comparing it. I think comparing it can be informative and you learn certain things by doing these comparisons, which I'll talk about. But if I just sheerly want to enjoy a tea, I prefer to drink it just in a Yixing teapot down here. And a cup. So one way to think about it is when you eat something very sweet and then you taste something like a raw pu'er, that pu'er is just going to taste very different than it would if you had a cleaner palate and you just had the tea. This is why it's important to think about food. If you're going to be eating food during the tea session, you need to think very carefully about the food that you're going to be serving. If you're having like Thai curry or something like that that's really strong flavored in the middle of a tea session, it's just going to taste different. And so when it comes to like drinking tea at a meal, something like dim sum, the tea is usually brewed to be quite strong. If you were to have that same tea brewed in just a normal context, the tea itself would probably be a little bit too strong to drink, just sort of in that vacuum tea space. So I think it's important to just keep those things in mind, even if that's not a side-by-side. So one way that a comparison could be bad is if you had a really, really smoky tea and then you compared it versus basically any iwu. It could be a really, really nice iwu, but if you had that smoky tea, you would have a really hard time tasting that iwu, and you would basically be able to tell that the smoky tea was much more smokier and strong, potentially, than the iwu tea, and the iwu tea you just would pick up on none of the different nuances. So you do comparisons that make sense. One comparison that would make sense is if you're comparing two pretty smoky teas that are sort of similar strengths to each other, and you might be able to learn, hey, actually this smoky tea A is considerably stronger than smoky tea B. Or comparing iwu, something like that. So I think if I were to get something like a 25-gram sample, I would definitely solo session it first with just my normal parameters a couple times. And then if I decided, hey, I might be interested in picking this up, then comparing it side by side with something that I already own could be an interesting way to go about it. So today I will be drinking the Love Forever Paper Tong cake, which I have finished about 2/3 of a cake. So I've drank quite a bit of this tea, definitely a regular brew, tea I know quite well. And on the other side, I have another Xiaguan heart-shaped cake. And literally this comparison is because they were made around the same time, or they were pressed around the same time, I should say, because the Love Forever uses aged material. And they're made by Feitai through Xiaguan, and they are both heart-shaped themed. And I saw this cake floating around from, I think, Tea Life and what's it called? King Tea Mall. So I ended up picking up one just on a whim from MXT, who I occasionally buy tea from. And it cost about $25, so a pretty cheap cake, considerably cheaper than the Love Forever. Just wanted to see how it is. And I've had it probably 4 or 5 times already on it. And so far it's been sort of a solid, resinous, greener, poor brew for me. Definitely has some age characteristics, but for me is a little bit on the greener side. So I'm curious to see how it matches up versus the Love Forever Paper Tong, which for me very solidly has some real notes of maturation, but it still has a lot of those Shangpuer characteristics as well. So yeah, let's get into that comparison. Okay, so on my left, I have the True Love Xiaguan cake, and on my right, I have the Love Forever. So I actually did a couple brews earlier on today, just an hour or so ago, just to sort of get acclimated to the tea. So I am on brew number 3 for both of these teas. I'm using 4 grams for 70 milliliters. This is a little bit lighter than what I normally do. It's just going to be inherently a little bit of a different tasting than you do. There are different ways and thoughts to go about it, but I chose to use slightly less leaf here. Okay, so first thing first, the hot water just hit these leaves, so I'm going to take a quick smell test here. Visibly, the Love Forever is brewing up a little bit darker. The leaves are also a little bit darker as well. Smells a bit resinous, a little bit raisiny, definitely some greener, grassier notes coming off of the True Love cake. Love Forever in comparison, fruitier, darker, woodier. Sweeter, I'd say overall. Definitely smells quite a bit more aged. Yep, so this going back to this tea, again, greener, more resinous, definitely. Cheers. Pretty full body. Definitely kind of this upfront, strong, dense, bittersweet thing going on. It's pretty drinkable overall. I'd say for me, this tea sort of feels like a strong summer sheng brew. Definitely some age characteristics for it, but not very strong in those. Not strong in comparison. Okay. Alright, so that was the True Love. Now for Love Forever. This might break the record for most times saying love in a video. Hopefully YouTube algorithm doesn't get the wrong ideas and think this is a Valentine's Day episode. Cheers. Just solo drinking some pu'er here. Alright, so heavier on the woody characteristics, maybe woody, a bit of leather. Much sweeter, I would say, than the other tea. Yeah, quite rewarding in its sweetness. Alright, so we're going to do steep number 4 here, just to sort of show you all how I do this. So So, yeah, I mean, there are different ways. I try to keep relatively close to my normal brewing parameters here, so brewing it a little bit longer just because we're using a little bit less leaf. One thing to also think about while doing comparisons is how does this tea differ from what it tastes like in a normal session? And I'm thinking about this specifically for the Love Forever because that's a cake that I have drank quite a bit of. And I would say in this comparison, at least for Steve number 3, the things that are different about the... I should have brewed that for a little longer. Oh well. The things that are different about the tea are more emphasized. So Love Forever for me is normally a pretty sturdy semi-aged brew. So it brings a little bit of bitterness and shung characteristics to it. Not tasting quite as much of that in this cup here. So that's not to say it doesn't exist when I do a solo session, just that when you put it in contrast with a tea that might be even stronger in those characteristics, you taste those a little bit less. So those are quite hot, so we're gonna let those cool down just a little bit. The Feitai company, it's a sort of company that's strongly associated with Xiaguan, especially in the mid to late 2000s, up until the more recent decade. They generally make tea that's considered to be for export to Taiwan. A little bit higher quality is the reputation of them, so I think we see a disproportionate amount of them sold by people like Scott and other folks. Hope to bring on some more Classico Xiaguan teas. I brought a couple tools in this order. This was the order I put in all the way back in like February or March, so it just got to my friend Garrett's recently. So yeah. Anyways, let's have this comparison. So steep number 4 here, True Love. Well, I don't call this tea super smoky. I think it has hints of that sort of barbecue-like experience to it. And after having the Love Forever, this tastes much more bitter. Just heavier on that resinous category. Quite strong. Yeah. Yeah, and I'd say this is overall, it's not wowing me. It's alright. I'd say this is a decent tea. If you like your tea on the stronger end, I like the resinous characteristics for it. It's a little bit too green for my taste. Going back to the Love Forever here, if I were to pick one of these teas to drink, it'd be pretty much hands down the Love Forever. Of course, it's much more expensive, but... yeah, so sweeter, raisiny, woody, it just has that sort of dark fruit plus leather sweetness to it. And we'll do a last smell comparison too. Pretty consistent with the previous brew. Yeah, so again, just much greener. So when we're looking at the dry leaf, I think the dry leaf of the cake of the True Love looked a little bit greener than the Love Forever. When you brew out the tea, these contrasts are a lot more obvious. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the wet leaf. I definitely recommend comparing the brewed out leaf of cakes once you brew it all the way out. And it can just sort of show you age and storage differences that may have occurred. The darker the leaf, the more humid the conditions are or have been in the past. Doesn't necessarily mean that the cake is cleaner or dirtier or anything like that, but it does tell you a little bit about the storage history of it. Yep. All right. So that pretty much confirms it. A lot of this was kind of what I expected. Yeah, I definitely recommend people try out comparing teas. I think it's an interesting way, especially when you're considering buying something. to compare something versus something you know. For in this case, the Love Forever. The True Love, as you might expect, is not something that I'm going to be rushing out to buy more of. I'll probably slowly drink through this cake. I think it's enjoyable enough to have occasionally, but nothing truly remarkable. Going to give it a 5.4 rating. The Love Forever I brought on to previous episodes that has a 6.5 rating, which still seems to me to be a pretty solid rating, and it has proven to be highly drinkable in this house, which is good because I own a bunch of it. So yeah, that just about wraps up this in-between episode. Let me know how you liked it, if you learned something about comparing teas, and I will see you all next time.